Welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking Sports Interviews. My name is Larry Frank. We're coming to you live from the NGSC Sports Radio studio here in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. We'll also be followed on TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com as well as all social media outlets. We're about 7 miles down the road from the Fort Campbell Army Post. Want to start out our show by thanking the men and women who continuously and previously served in our armed forces to allow us the opportunity to live freely. What a show we have for you tonight, folks. Just an incredible show. Obviously, this week has been a little wild. We had the Shedeur Sanders thing, Shilo Sanders getting drafted, Travis Hunter getting drafted, Deion Sanders in the news, and we couldn't come up with a better guest for you tonight than the voice of the Colorado Buffaloes football and basketball team. Let's welcome in Mark Johnson. Let me go ahead and bring him up here. There he is. Mark, how you doing today, buddy?
Fantastic. And you're right. It has been a wild weekend here in Boulder, Colorado. It seems that every headline that we saw over the weekend had something to do with the Buffaloes.
Yeah, it certainly did. And I want to start right off before we even get to that. Let's start off. I mean, it's been what? I think it was December 3rd. I'm trying to remember back. 2022. The news broke. I believe it was Rick George, who was the athletic director, that broke the news that Deion Sanders is going to become the 28th coach of the Colorado Buffaloes. Go back to that time, or that day, actually, when you first heard the news, and what was your reaction to the news?
Well, you've got to go a couple of months before that. I had been kind of tipped off there were conversations going on. And at first I thought that doesn't make any sense. Deion Sanders, his entire career, for the most part, had been in the southeastern part of the country, didn't have any connections to the Pac-12 at that point in time, or Pac-10. And so it was not a guy that really had any tentacles that had reached out to this area. And so I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. But then I started nosing around. I was told, no, there are actual conversations. This is real. And so when it finally came to fruition, I was kind of shocked. I was fascinated by the possibilities of what that would look like. But what happened when he rolled onto campus here? You saw a football program that in 2022 was probably the worst Power 5 team in America. Certainly, I think the most irrelevant Power 5 team in America. And overnight, it became the number one point of fascination in college football. Now, it took a while to figure out if the Buffs were going to be competitive, but he entirely turned around the perception of the program, and then ultimately, over the course of 2 seasons, went from 1 to 4 wins to 9 wins last year, ranked for much of the year in the top 25, Heisman Trophy winner, one of the top quarterbacks despite this past week's draft. And so it really has been a fascinating just turnaround of this program and evolution of what Colorado football has been. And so it really has been an amazing ride. And I've learned a lot about what Prime is all about, how he handles his business, what his program is. But it's been amazing transformation here in the last, 50 months or so.
Yeah. And, let me ask you this. What has impressed you the most about Coach Sanders, and what has maybe disappointed you, if anything, about his role as head coach here?
Well, the one thing that I've learned about him is, number one, what the public perception is very different than the reality. Behind all the, attention and all the social media activity and all the, controversial topics that seem to be out there is a real football program on the interior. And so that gets lost, I think, a lot of times. The thing I've learned about him individually, I've said before, he's kind of one of one. I mean, he's a brand. He's a cultural icon. He's one of the greatest athletes in the history of sports. And one thing about all that kind of gets caught up from an attention standpoint is the fact that he really is an insightful guy. I mean, I could go into detail about some of the different times where he's come to me with different things in regards to our show and what we should do. And maybe we should try this, because he's always thinking about the marketing, the presentation. He's very attuned to what's happening. He's very insightful. He said to me things about broadcasting, and I'm a guy that's been doing broadcasting for 35 years. He's made some observations at different times. I think, well, that's really insightful insightful. I can't believe he picked up on that. So he's a very sharp guy. Make no mistake about that. I don't know if there's a disappointment. I mean, the one thing I didn't expect, a guy in my position, I'm accustomed to walking down the hallway and I pop into the coach's office. He and I can sit and talk for half hour, 45 minutes. You don't do that with Coach Prime because he's got, 25 balls in a year at any given time. And so when we do our show together, for example, when I outcue the final segment of the show, his people are sweeping him away because he's got corporate meetings and he's got endorsements that he's talking to and he's got television shoots and all those kind of things. And so I wouldn't say it's a disappointment. It's just a different way of doing business that I've had become accustomed to over the last 2 seasons that I haven't had traditionally when you deal with a traditional coaching set of circumstances.
We're with Mark Johnson, voice of the Colorado Buffaloes. Mark, let me ask you this. He comes into Boulder, the first meeting he ever has with the players. Everyone talks about that meeting. He said, and I'm going to try to quote this, to the players, get ready to find a new team and take the transfer portal out of town. As well as he also said, he basically tried to make some of them quit, he said. He's going to make some of them quit.
Yep.
When you heard this meeting, and I know you did, what was your takeaway from that meeting?
Well, at first, you're a little bit shocked by the verbiage and kind of what the presentation was like. The more I thought about it, when he said he was going to try and get guys to quit, the idea was to raise the bar to the point we're going to find out whether you want to pay the price to be here or not. Secondly is this, and this I learned in hindsight, and I was back on my heels as much as anybody when I saw that. I thought it was very different and a very stark contrast to traditionally what we've seen in college football. Now, what it's turned out to be in hindsight, Prime really has been ahead of the curve from a transfer portal standpoint, what this whole thing looks like, how it's more NFL-like than maybe we perceived it to be a couple of years ago. And so I think that meeting, if we saw it today, would not nearly be as startling as it was a couple of years ago. And he kind of saw what was coming. And I've had long conversations about that. College athletics is becoming more and more professional, more and more NFL-like than ever before. Just earlier today, I was doing a speaking event with Nick Saban, and he and I got talking about that. He was in town for an event, and so him and I were on stage together, and he got talking about how this thing didn't like it. But he said this is what it's becoming right now. And so both, as we see this transition to this professional model, whatever on the other side it's going to look like, both the coaching side and the player side are going to have to get accustomed to kind of that cutthroat nature we see in professional sports because that's what college athletics is becoming.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The big story of the week, there was some good moments for the Colorado Buffalo football players as some they got drafted, but obviously the story of the week is Shedeur Sanders. I mean, you can't go without hearing about that, no matter what you listen to. Talk about the draft and, how shocked were you? What we all witnessed him going for what we all thought was going to be a first round or maybe even a late round, first round draft pick to drop into the 5th round. You witnessed it just like us all. What was your reaction to it, and how surprised were you?
Well, I was shocked by what we saw, and here's why. I mean, I still think that Shedeur Sanders has got a chance to be a very good NFL quarterback and a starting NFL quarterback. About a month and a half before the draft, I've got friends of mine working in the NFL as long as I did that were dropping me a line saying, hey, we're starting to get word that the NFL, by and large, does not have a first-round grade on him. They think he's an early second-round guy, and which kind of shocked me. And so I asked some probing questions about what exactly he's seeing, and they talked about some of the stuff we've all heard about, holding the ball a little bit too long, maybe not being as constant to the offense as much as maybe he needs to be. And so I thought, okay, well, there's a chance going into the weekend he's going to drop. Then we started hearing the stories, whether you believe them or not, there seems to be some reality, or at least a belief in the NFL, that he did not conduct himself the way that they wanted to see in those pre-draft interviews and those pre-draft meetings. And so once you started to hear that, you thought, boy, if that's a reality, and I don't know what it is, he was always great with me. I've never had an issue with Shedeur in terms of my interactions with him. But if that was the case, you can see why they might have been letting him drop or allowing him to drop throughout the weekend. Like I said, I think the Cleveland Browns got one hell of a steal in the 5th round, picking him up, because I do back. He's got things to learn, just like any quarterback does at that level. He's going to have to learn to get rid of the ball a bit quicker, obviously. He's going to have to learn to make better reads. He's going to have to learn there are times you've got to go deep with the football, and Travis Hunter's not going to be the guy on the back end catching that football. And so I think those are all reasonable questions as to how he's going to translate to the National Football League. But I do think there is a foundation there for him, and I think the Cleveland Browns got a heck of a steal in the 5th round picking Shedeur Sanders.
And we can't take away the talent, the ability that this kid has. I mean, we've all seen it. You've seen it more than anyone covering the team. Talk about Shedeur Sanders, the individual, and what you know about the individual, his makeup, his leadership, the way he conducts himself.
Well, he's obviously grown up in a set of circumstances where his father, being a great athlete, has put certain, shall we say, expectations on his son, right? And so he understands that. He understands the spotlight. If you're going to be a highly drafted quarterback, which he turned out not to be, and you walk into a franchise, you're automatically going to have the public eye on you. You're going to have all the bright spotlight on you. And I'm not sure there's been anybody that's been more conditioned to understand what that's all about than what Shedeur has. So that type of experience is not going to affect him. As I said earlier, he's going to have transitional things that he's going to have to figure out, simply because that's part of the process of moving up a level. Is you're going to have to understand the windows get smaller, the reads have to be sharper, the pre-snap reads have to be quicker because the athletes are better at that level. And so he's going to have those lessons to learn. He doesn't, I wouldn't say he's got doesn't have a John Elway type arm or a Jay Cutler type arm or one of those, cannons on his right shoulder, but he's got enough arm to make all of the throws in the NFL. I think he's a very bright guy, so I think he can learn these things very, very quickly. He understands the game of football. So there are a lot of things that I think are positives with Shedeur Sanders. He's going to have to make a transition just like anybody does, though, to that level. And so I do, like I said, I do expect him to hang around the league a long time. I've always thought he could be a starting quarterback. The guy that sits next to me in our broadcast, Gary Barnett, has been around a lot of football over the course of 50 years. Gary has said he thinks he's an NFL quarterback. Pat Shurmur, the offensive coordinator for the Buffaloes, has spent a long time, many decades in the National Football League. Pat has always sworn up and down. He always used to say to me, Mark, he and I did a piece every week, and he'd always say, Mark, that is one heroic son of a gun. We got a quarterback. And so he's got intangibles that I think are going to translate to the NFL, and I'm kind of excited now to kind of watch, especially with a chip on his shoulder, to see how he kind of navigates the rough waters ahead of him.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Tom Brady was a 7th-round draft pick. So, you just never know. I mean, let me ask you this. Everybody's trying to dissect the reason why Shedeur dropped in the draft. Some people will say it was collusion. Some will say it's his attitude, the way he conducted himself in these interviews, in the different press conferences he held, not competing in the combine. I just want to ask you this, and it's a real honest question, but do you think Deion Sanders in any way was part of the reason that Shedeur dropped in the draft?
Well, I think it's possible. I mean, we know this. There is a very polarizing response to Coach Prime. I mean, there's some people that love him. There's some people that don't love him. I've enjoyed my 2 years working with him. I think he's fantastic. I think he's good for Colorado football. I think he brings attention to the game of college football. And so I think there's some very positives come from that. But he can be polarizing at times. I mean, I hear from people, we do the broadcast, and if I say something positive about Prime, I get a lot of messages basically telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. If I question something in the field, I get the opposite, where those who are very pro Prime will drop me a line. And so I see that polarization. And so I'd have to be silly, I think, not to think that there might be some of that in the National Football League. Now, I don't know to what degree that may take place. I know everyone in the NFL certainly respects what he was as a player. I don't think there's any question about that. But He's got some polarizing aspects and characteristics to him, so that may certainly have played a role in what was going on and what transpired. And I guess maybe we'll find out as time goes on here.
Yeah, and do you think that maybe, and the last question about Shedeur, and we'll move on, do you think maybe that Shedeur tries to act a lot like his dad in a lot of these situations? And could it be possible the best thing for Shedeur might be for Deion to step out of the way and let his son basically, grow up and become his own person?
Well, I think that does he act like his father? I'll tell you this. I saw a relative of mine here about 2 months ago. I hadn't seen him in about 20 years. And I walked in, and he said to me, he goes, "You know what? You act and move exactly like your father did." So I don't think that's a criticism. That we all do that, right? I look and act like my dad did. You probably look and act like your dad was, and Shedeur acts and moves like his father did. And so that's just part of being a son. Number one. In terms of, think about what we're saying, and I know it's a controversial topic. We live in a world where we talk all the time about more fathers need to be active in their son's life. And here you've got a father that's very active in his son's life. We're saying, well, maybe you shouldn't be so active in the life. So I don't know. The last conversation Prime and I had about this whole process leading up to the draft, it was about a month and a half ago. And I asked something about that, and he said, why would I not be part of this? I've walked the road. I know the ins and outs. I know the people. I know the franchises. He said, would it not be wouldn't I be guilty of being a delinquent father if I didn't help my son through this process? So I don't know. I mean, I know there are polarizing aspects we just talked about, but I'm hard pressed to say, you know what, Dad, you shouldn't be part of your son's life and help him navigate this. I lost my father at a young age. I wish he would have been part of my life when I was navigating becoming an adult male. And so, that's, to me, that's an interesting topic that I think you can probably go back and forth on pretty good. But it seems kind of funny we're saying, yeah, Dad, you shouldn't be part of your son's life. I think that's kind of a stretch in this whole process.
Let's move on. There's another Sanders that made news this week, drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, his brother, Shilo. Obviously you know a lot, but about Shilo, and do you really think he has a legitimate chance to play in the NFL?
I think in the right position he does. When you look at that position, get into the secondary of the National Football League, you get into some freakish athletes, just like his teammate Travis Hunter is one of the great freaks that I've ever seen. And Shilo is a fine athlete. I don't know when you test him against the numbers if he's going to, grade as high as some guys out there in the secondary, certainly at the safety position of the National Football League. I'll say this: he's got a high football IQ. And he is a hard-hitting Jesse, man. I mean, he blew some people up during his 2 years here at CU. And so I think in the right position, he can find a spot in the National Football League. But, go back to what we've just been talking about. Is there a bias against the Sanders? Some people certainly think there is. If there is against Shedeur, it's going to be there for Shilo as well. And so he may have to battle that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and good thing for Shilo is that he's going to a team that really lacks depth at the safety position. So I don't think he can get into a better situation right now than being with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, I think so. And him being an undrafted free agent signing, that's one thing about if you're going to be a late round guy, they've always said in the NFL, instead of being a late round guy, it might be a better circumstance to be an undrafted free agent where you can pick your circumstances. And so that might be the bonus and maybe the silver lining of this whole set of circumstances with Shilo is that he was able to kind of pick and choose his set of circumstances. And I think he did pick a good, opportunity with the franchise he went to.
I agree 100%. Now, we talked briefly just now about Travis Hunter, who I just can't say enough about this guy. I love him to death. I love the way he plays the game on both sides of the football. It doesn't hurt that he had Deion Sanders, who also played both sides of the football in the NFL. Talk about how good this guy really is. And we know he can play in the NFL, but can he be at the level in both positions in the NFL?
Well, the first thing is, in the draft, you hear the phrase thrown around, can't miss guys. And I think we utilize that term a little bit too much on occasion. Well, we know that the draft is about a 50-50 proposition, right? I mean, there's a lot of evaluation that goes in, but you don't know what's going on up here. And you don't know what's going on in the heart with somebody. I think after watching Travis Hunter for 2 years, I think he's as close to being can't miss as you can find. I mean, that guy, number one, just athletically speaking, I mean, he's just stupid what he's able to do physically. There wasn't a game where at some point I'm doing the game and my mouth just drops open like I can't believe what I just saw. And so he is a freak of an athlete, number one. Number two, he's got a desire. There's a true desire for greatness, and any great player that we've ever been around or watched, we know that you've got to have that desire, that in modern day terms, it's the Mamba mentality, right? If you want to use the Kobe Bryant line, I mean, he's got that. He wants to be, and then there's a maturation, or a mature level about him. I think it's really interesting. He's not the kind of guy you're going to see going out and having parties and doing all those kind of things. I mean, he's a homebody. All he does is plays football and loves football and hangs out at home. I don't worry about that's the one thing. Watch number 2 is like that. There's one guy you never worry about away from the field. I mean, he's just one of those guys. And so I think he's as can't miss as we've seen in a number of years. Now, to your second part of your question about playing both ways, that's a tall order. And Travis obviously says he wants to do it. I just don't understand how in the National Football League, there were times in Colorado you play 120, 125 snaps a game. I don't know how you could possibly do that in a physical league like the National Football League. I've always thought in the NFL with Travis, he'd end up being a top-level shutdown corner where you're locking down a third of the field, and that'll help your defensive rotations and what you do because he's so good on that one third of the field. And then you'll find a package for him where 8, 10, 12, 15 snaps a game, you've got a package for him on the offense because as soon as he steps on the field, that defense has got to be aware of him. They've got to account for him. And so I've always thought that's the way he probably ends up in the National Football League. I just don't know if the physicality in the NFL is going to allow somebody to play, full-time on both sides. I'm just not sure how that could possibly happen.
Well, a couple more questions. We'll let you run here. Obviously, 3 key people are leaving,
Yep.
as you know. Both 2 of them, his sons. Now that his sons are gone, do you see maybe in the next year or 2 that maybe Deion himself will be gone from Colorado?
If you would have asked me that a year ago, I'd say there would be a reasonable expectation, or at least a thought, that he might walk away after his sons were done playing. He just signed a brand new contract for $10.5 million a year. And he is committed to this thing as anything I've ever seen. And so I don't think that's the case. I think he likes what he's done. This week, there's been a lot of news about transfer players who've been coming in. He signed the number 2 high school quarterback in America in Julian Lewis. He brought in a very good veteran quarterback from Liberty in Caden Salter. They have bolstered the offensive line. I mentioned Pat Shermer a while ago. I was with Pat here a couple of weeks ago, and I said, all right, are the Buffs going to be able to run the football next season because they're going to have to? And he goes, oh, yeah, without question. He says, we've made enormous upgrades up front. They've just signed another running back, a heralded guy, and they said they're going to run the football effectively, give protection to these quarterbacks because they don't have that, as I said earlier, that heroic son of a gun there under center that can make plays and bail them out at times. So, and they've done some great stuff on the defensive side, too. I think Prime, who obviously being a great athlete, has always loved a challenge. And I think there were people that doubted him that when his sons were gone, you're leaving. Now they're gone onto the NFL. I think he wants to prove more people wrong, and he's really committed to this thing. Everything he's done from a staff standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, obviously signing the contract extension, has said he's staying. He wants to be part of this. He wants to have success here. And so there's nothing that I've seen in my position internally with this program that says he's going anywhere anytime soon.
Marshall Faulk, new running back coach. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, how about that? I mean, you got 3 guys with gold jackets on this staff. You got Warren Sapp on the defensive line. You bring in Marshall Faulk at running back coach. And then, of course, Coach Prime's got his own gold jacket. So, in terms of kind of the, shall we say, the flash of a staff in terms of what catches your eye, this staff is wildly attractive when you talk to recruits and potential transfer players coming into this thing. You've got more NFL guys. You've got more gold jackets and Hall of Fame guys on this staff than any staff in America. And so it really is kind of fascinating to watch. And it's been fun to get a chance to talk to Marshall or Warren and talk to them about their coaching desire and why they're doing it. It's really an interesting thing. And I guess, considering how Prime does nothing in a subtle way, I guess it should make sense he's going to bring in those kind of coaches to add to his staff and add that, that flash again to his staff. And so it's been really interesting to watch and how that's all going to work once we get to the season. I mean, I watched, Marshall's been here now through spring ball, but it'll be interesting to see once we get to fall camp and how that staff really settles in and what they do going into the season and how his role is and what it means and how he affects, this roster. Is really going to be fun to watch, I think.
Saying that, the last question for you is, especially, and I know all the Colorado fans that are listening to our show, wants to know this. What are your expectations for this team? They just had 9 victories last year, lost,
Yep.
like you said, some key players, but also brought in some talented players. What is your expectations for this team this upcoming year?
Well, that's the hard thing about this. And I mentioned I was with Nick Saban today, and I asked him a similar question. I said, okay, who do you look at? Who do you like this upcoming season? It should be in the running for the national championship. And he said, Mark, I don't know. Rosters aren't set right now. We don't know who's going to still be here and who's going to be brought in. It's so hard to evaluate. Now, with that being said, when you look at the schedule, they've got a pretty salty game with Georgia Tech to start. And then they've got Wyoming and Delaware in the non-conference slate. Okay, there's 2 games you certainly should win. Like I said, Georgia Tech will be a tough one. On paper, most of the teams that were successful last year in the Big 12 are coming to Boulder this year. So it's a home-heavy schedule. You got 7 at home, 5 on the road. You've got the top teams from a year ago coming into Boulder. So the schedule sets up very nice. I was on a betting show the other day, and they told me that the over-under is 6.5, and I said, I'm taking the over based on what I know right now and how that schedule sets up. But it's so hard to project right now in college football because these rosters are so fluid with the transfer portal. And so I like what they've done. I'm thinking there are going to be some positive things that happen, and I'll take the over, and that's about the best I can give you right now, I think.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, I want to thank you very, very much for taking time out of, I know it's a busy schedule for you, to join us on Frankly Speaking Sports this evening.
All right. Always a pleasure, and look forward to having be on with you again.
All right. Thanks again.
You bet.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the great voice of the Colorado Buffaloes football and basketball team, Mark Johnson. Once again, thank you all for joining us tonight on Frankly Speaking Sports. A reminder that you can go to NGSC Sports, Tobacco Road Sports Radio, and of course, all our social media outlets to listen to this interview and all our other great interviews, also on YouTube as well. Once again, thank you and have a great night.